Today, we are doing a deep dive into, well, probably the most famous paranormal investigation in modern history, and maybe the most frustrating one, too.
Absolutely. We're going back to 1977.
Yeah, 1977, and we're stepping inside a house that just became totally synonymous with controversy.
Yeah.
284 Green Street, Enfield, North London.
And, to really get the weight of what happened, you have to picture the setting. This wasn't some spooky old castle, not at all.
No, not even close.
It was a very ordinary, semi-detached council house, Brimsdown area, working-class neighborhood, a bit damp, probably cool inside, just completely mundane.
And that ordinariness, that brick-and-mortar symbol of the British welfare state, supposed to be safe, reliable housing, that's actually what makes the whole thing even more terrifying.
Right, a ghost in a Gothic mansion, that's like a storybook thing.
Exactly. But a haunting in a house right next to the Stansted Express railway line, a house with, worn linoleum floors and thin walls, that feels, well, uncomfortably real.
And living inside was the Hodgson family. Peggy Hodgson, a single mother, and she was really dealing with the tough reality of Britain in the late 70s.
Yeah, the divorce was recent, painful, and the economy, terrible.
Just awful. You have to remember, inflation was hitting, almost 16%? It was crazy. So she wasn't just struggling emotionally. She was really fighting just to keep things afloat financially.
And she had 4 kids. Margaret was the oldest, then Janet, then Johnny, then Billy the youngest. But the whole story, it really pivots around 11-year-old Janet.
Yeah, Janet, by all accounts, just a normal, bright kid.
Yeah.
Liked school sports. Right at that really tricky age, bridging childhood and adolescence.
That specific age, that flux, it becomes so central later on, doesn't it? To basically every theory trying to explain what happened.
It really does. But whatever the ultimate cause was, the first signs were, pretty subtle. Just some shuffling noises, August 30th, coming from the girl's bedroom upstairs.
And Peggy, naturally, she just thought it was the kids messing about.
Of course. But things escalated incredibly quickly. The very next night, August 31st, around 9:30 p.m., first some rhythmic thumping sounds. Then Peggy rushes upstairs.
And what does she find?
She sees this heavy, old oak chest of drawers. It had slid out from the wall, blocking the doorway to the girl's room.
Now, this thing was heavy, right? Not something kids could just shove around easily.
No way. Far too heavy. And definitely not something that would just slide on its own. Peggy manages to push this massive thing back into place.
Okay.
But the second her hands are on the wood, she feels it. This unseen physical force pushing back at her, sliding the chest forward again.
Wow. So like a direct physical confrontation.
Exactly. That's the moment the ordinary just shatters for her. She knew instantly this wasn't the kids playing a prank.
So she grabs the children.
Grabs the kids, runs across the street to the neighbors, the Nottinghams.
And that specific incident, that heavy chest moving, that really defines what we're trying to do today, doesn't it?
It sets up the core problem. We're here to unpack this central paradox of Enfield, because this one case gives us both incredibly strong evidence for something paranormal.
Like a police officer's sworn statement.
Exactly. Rock-solid testimony. But it also gives us documented proof of faking by Janet herself, the girl at the center of everything.
It forces you to hold 2 completely opposite ideas at the same time. How can both be true? That's the 80-20 split we need to wrestle with.
The sources just don't let you off easy. They present this messy, contradictory reality. Okay, so let's unpack this.
Right, let's start with that ordinary house and the official record, because the atmosphere really matters here, doesn't it?
It does. The fact that this was, worn linoleum, cheap furniture, working-class Brimsdown.
Yeah.
It makes the horror feel universal. Not some faraway spooky tale, but like it could happen next door.
And the first witnesses, the ones outside the immediate family, they were crucial early on for credibility.
Absolutely. When Peggy and the kids ran out, the neighbor, Vic Nottingham, he was the first one to go into the house to check things out.
Described as a no-nonsense builder. A practical guy.
Yeah, exactly. He went in expecting a rational explanation. Bad pipes, drafts, maybe the kids had set something up.
But he didn't find one.
No. As he was walking through the rooms, looking around, he starts hearing these sharp, distinct rapping sounds. Rhythmic knocks.
And they followed him.
Apparently, yeah. They seemed to follow him from room to room. And look, he was shaken up enough by it that he agreed with Peggy. They needed to call the police.
Okay, and this is a huge turning point, because now it moves from just a family story to an official investigation. And this is where things get really difficult for the pure skeptics.
Definitely. Because woman police constable Carolyn Heeks arrives on the scene. And she's not coming in expecting ghosts, right? She's a trained professional observer.
Her job is facts, evidence, assessing crime scenes, taking statements, not fantasy.
So she's there in the living room, listening to this terrified family's account. And then, apparently, completely out of the blue, something happens right there in front of her.
And she didn't just tell her colleagues about it later. She signed a legal affidavit, a sworn statement.
We really need to pause on this affidavit.
Right.
It's not just anecdotal. It's a legal document. She swore to this under penalty of perjury.
What did she say she saw?
WPC Heeps stated, and this is her wording, she saw a chair come off the floor. Ooh, maybe a half inch, I should say.
Just half an inch?
Half an inch. But then it didn't just wobble or fall, it slid. It slid about 3.5 or 4 feet across the floor, then just stopped. Completely still.
And she checked it.
Immediately. Like a proper investigator. She checked for wires, strings, magnets, anything under the chair, under the cushion. Found absolutely nothing.
And she even did that test with the marble, right? To check the floor wasn't slanted.
Yeah, a simple but clever test. Put a marble down to see if it would roll on its own because of an uneven floor. The marble didn't move, stayed perfectly still.
Well, it's extraordinary, really. In the whole history of investigating these kinds of things, getting a signed legal statement from a police officer, witnessing inexplicable physical movement, that's incredibly rare.
It really shifts the burden of proof, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You have an objective, trained professional confirming that in that moment, in that living room, the basic laws of physics seem to be, well, violated.
You could maybe dismiss the story of a distraught mother or kids playing tricks, but it's much, much harder to dismiss the sworn testimony of a police officer who put her career on the line signing that document.
You'd think that would be enough for major intervention. But despite seeing it themselves, despite obviously sympathizing with the family, the police had to close their file.
Why?
Their official conclusion was, since no actual law had been broken, no assault, no theft, it was technically not a police matter.
So even though they confirmed something impossible happened,
They couldn't do anything about it. The official systems, the law, they had no framework for dealing with it. The Hodgsons were left alone again, holding this police report that basically confirmed their nightmare was real but offered zero help.
and with the police unable to help, things didn't get better. They got much, much worse.
Oh yeah, the phenomena just escalated rapidly. Those strange knocks turned into this relentless, violent cacophony, day and night. It got so bad the family basically gave up on sleeping in separate rooms.
They all huddled together.
Yeah, sleeping in one room, often with the lights on all night. It literally became like a siege. They were trapped in their own home.
And the activity went beyond just noise, right? It became physically threatening.
Definitely. Small, everyday things started acting like projectiles, almost like they were being aimed. Witnesses talked about Lego bricks, marbles, even D-cell batteries flying across rooms at high speed.
And there was that detail about them being hot.
Yes. Several people reported that when they picked up these flying objects, immediately after they landed, they felt strangely hot, like unusually warm to the touch, which suggests maybe some kind of energy discharge. It's very odd.
It wasn't just small things either. There were fires.
Spontaneous fires, yeah. Small fires would just ignite out of nowhere, in drawers, on the carpet.
Yeah.
Then they just flicker out on their own before causing major damage. Imagine living like that, never knowing what object might suddenly combust or fly at you.
The stress must have been unbelievable, so Peggy felt she had no choice.
Apparently not. In desperation, needing someone to witness this, maybe help, she contacted the media, specifically the Daily Mirror.
And that's when this private terror exploded into the public consciousness.
Instantly. And the media presence actually provided immediate, very public verification.
How so?
Well, the reporter, Graham Morris, and his photographer, they arrived, naturally, very skeptical, thinking it was probably nonsense.
Standard journalistic approach.
Right. Morris was apparently just about to leave, thinking he'd wasted his time. And just then, a Lego brick shoots across the room and hits him hard, right above the eye.
No way. Did it leave a mark?
It did. He apparently showed the visible mark later as proof. That single incident, witnessed by the press, turned it from a family's scary story into this massive public spectacle.
And that media attention brought in the big guns, the investigators who really came to define the case.
Exactly. The Society for Psychical Research, the SPR, got involved, and the two main investigators they sent were, well, a fascinating study in contrasts. You had the believer and the skeptic.
Okay, tell us about them. Who was the believer?
That was Maurice Grosse. Now, Grosse wasn't some airy-fairy mystic. He was a successful inventor, held patents, a logical kind of guy.
Right.
But he was also carrying immense personal grief. His own daughter, also named Janet, had died tragically in a motorcycle accident just the year before in 1976.
Oh, wow. So for Grosse, this investigation wasn't just academic.
Not at all. It seems clear it became a deeply personal quest for him. He was searching for proof of life after death, driven by his own loss. This fueled his incredible empathy for the Hodgson family, especially young Janet, and his determination to prove the phenomena were real.
But that personal connection, that also makes him potentially vulnerable, right, to seeing what he wants to see. Confirmation bias.
Absolutely, that's a valid concern, which makes his investigative partner even more important.
And that was Guy Lyon Playfair, the skeptic.
Yes, Playfair was very different. An experienced author, he traveled widely, investigated psychic phenomena before. And crucially, he came into Enfield deeply skeptical, especially of the children. He suspected tricks right from the start.
So the fact that Playfair, the guy looking for fraud, eventually became convinced that at least some of the events were genuinely inexplicable, that carries a lot of weight.
Huge weight. He acted as a kind of internal check on Grosse's perhaps more emotionally driven approach.
And these two, Grosse and Playfair, they basically moved in.
Pretty much. For 18 long months, they maintained this near-constant vigil at 284 Green Street. They conducted over 25 all-night watches, recorded something like 180 hours of audio on reel-to-reel tapes.
Reel-to-reel.
Yeah, old-school tech. And they documented literally thousands of separate incidents, knockings, voices, objects moving.
The sheer amount of documentation itself is pretty staggering.
It's impossible to just dismiss it all. They witnessed things like a teapot shaking violently on throne. They saw heavy metal spoons bending into weird shapes, seemingly by themselves.
And then there were the really big things, the heavy furniture.
Right, we're not talking about a wobbly little table here. There are two incidents that are just mind-boggling in terms of the physical force involved.
The fireplace.
The fireplace.
Right.
A massive old cast iron fireplace. And this thing wasn't just freestanding. It was cemented into the brick chimney breast, solidly fixed. Witnesses saw it wrenched out from the wall, pulled forward. Just imagine the force needed to break cement and move that much weight.
And the other one, the settee.
The settee, yeah. A heavy sofa. Multiple witnesses reported seeing it levitate, lift off the floor, and then completely overturn, flip over in midair.
Okay, that simply cannot be explained away as two young girls playing a prank. The physics don't work.
They just don't. But what was really fascinating and also frustrating for the investigators was the apparent intelligence behind it all. Grosse apparently said, "It's smarter than we are."
What did he mean by that?
They noticed this consistent pattern. The really dramatic stuff, the levitations, the fireplace moving, the settee flipping, it always seemed to happen when the children weren't being closely watched. The moment they were under direct, unblinking observation, the major activity tended to stop.
And that leads to two totally different interpretations, doesn't it?
Exactly. For Grosse, the believer, this was proof of a cunning paranormal entity that was actively avoiding being caught, avoiding scientific scrutiny.
But for the skeptics,
For the skeptics, that's the classic signature of a hoax. If you need privacy to rig the effect or throw the object, it strongly suggests you are the one doing it. This inability to capture the really big stuff on demand created this deep puzzle.
so they're documenting things that seem physically impossible, yet the force behind it is slippery, elusive.
Constantly elusive. But then the case took another massive turn, the one that made it truly global news. The focus shifted from just physical chaos to a voice.
Right. This is where it gets really interesting. So the physical phenomena were baffling enough, but when that chaos seemed to find a voice, using Janet as its mouthpiece, that's when Enfield went from a UK story to an international sensation.
Yeah, it was the moment the phenomenon appeared to directly engage, to communicate. You have to picture the scene. Grosse has his tape recorder running that old reel-to-reel machine. He's asking questions into the tense silence of this damp, strange room. And then, from this 11-year-old girl, Janet, comes this voice.
Describe.
It was deep, gravelly, guttural, raspy. Like a really old man, someone who'd smoked heavily for decades, completely unlike a child's voice. It was often angry, cursing, making threats against the family and the investigators.
And this voice spoke for long periods.
For hours sometimes, apparently.
Yeah.
And eventually, amidst all the ranting, it gave a name and a story.
This is the famous Bill Wilkins part.
Exactly. The core quote, the one that's captured on those tapes and still sounds incredibly chilling today, is something like, "My name is Bill, Just before I died, I went blind. And then I had a hemorrhage. And I fell asleep. And I died in the chair in the corner downstairs.
Wow. Okay, now, setting aside the content for a second, what about the voice itself? The sound production. Could Janet have just been faking that, putting on a voice?
Well, this is where it gets really compelling from a physiological standpoint. Vocal experts were brought in later to analyze those tapes.
And what did they find?
Their conclusions were pretty definitive. They determined the sound wasn't being produced by Janet's normal vocal cords. It was being produced using the false vocal cords.
Okay, explain those. The false vocal cords.
Right, so they're also called the ventricular folds. They sit just above your true vocal cords, higher in the larynx. We don't normally use them for speech. They're more involved in things like coughing or clearing your throat or making really deep growling sounds.
Not designed for talking.
Not for sustained speech, no. And the experts said that for a child, especially, to maintain that deep, raspy voice using those false cords for hours on end, speaking coherently, it's incredibly difficult, physiologically really taxing.
What did they compare it to?
One analogy was like an untrained person trying to run a marathon. Maybe possible for a short burst, but to keep it up for hours? Extremely unlikely, and it would be physically painful, potentially damaging.
So it suggests either Janet was some kind of ventriloquism prodigy with unbelievable stamina,
or something else was enabling or producing that sound.
But the real bombshell wasn't just the voice itself, it was the information it provided, the details about Bill Wilkins.
This is the part that honestly is hardest to explain away. Grosse and Playfair took her the specific details, the name, the cause of death, the blindness, dying in the chair downstairs, and they went looking. Could they find a Bill Wilkins connected to that house?
And did they?
After a lot of digging, yes. They managed to locate a man who confirmed he was the son of William Charles Wilkins.
Okay.
They played in the tape recordings, let him hear this strange, raspy voice describing his own father's death.
What was his reaction?
Apparently, he was absolutely stunned, just silenced by it, because he confirmed every single detail the voice had given.
Every detail.
Every specific detail. His father, William Charles Wilkins, had lived at 284 Green Street. He had died on June 20th, 1963, 14 years earlier. He had suffered a brain hemorrhage. It had caused blindness shortly before he died. And yes, he died in his favorite armchair, in the downstairs living room of that house.
Okay, stop right there.
Yeah.
How? How could an 11-year-old girl in 1977 possibly know that level of intimate, specific detail about a man who died 14 years before she was even the focus of this?
That's the million-dollar question. This wasn't public knowledge. It wasn't something you could look up easily back then. It wasn't neighborhood gossip years later. These were private family details about his final moments.
So at this point, it must have felt like case closed.
You'd absolutely think so.
Yeah.
You've got phenomena confirmed by the police. You've got this physiologically strange voice. And now you have the voice providing specific, secret information that's been irrefutably corroborated by the deceased's own son.
He looks like the perfect proof, the smoking gun for a genuine haunting.
If the story had just stopped right there, Enfield would probably be Exhibit A in the case for survival after death. Undisputed evidence.
This is Enfield.
But this is Enfield. And just when you think you have certainty, the entire narrative gets flipped upside down again. Devastatingly so.
That really is the cruel twist in the Enfield story, isn't it? Just when Grosse and Playfair must have felt they had undeniable proof, the rug gets pulled out.
Completely. They were desperate, understandably, to get visual evidence of the phenomena happening while the voice was speaking, to link the two definitively. So they set up a remote-controlled video camera,
Aimed at Janet.
aimed at the area where things often happened, including where Janet usually was. It was set to record when the investigators weren't physically in the room, to catch things spontaneously.
And what did it capture?
It captured something devastating, especially for Maurice Grosse, who'd really developed this protective, almost fatherly bond with Janet and her sister.
What was on the tape?
The footage showed Janet, alone in the room, believing she was completely unobserved, and she was actively faking phenomena.
Faking what?
She was caught on camera bending spoons with her hands and trying to bend a small iron bar. Again, just using her own physical effort.
Oh, no. That's bad.
It's really bad. And it wasn't just the video. Grosse himself also personally witnessed Janet faking things on other occasions.
Like what?
He apparently caught her red-handed, banging a broom handle on the ceiling to make the knocking sounds that were so common. And another time, he found she'd hidden his tape recorder, presumably to create a mysterious disappearance event.
So, Undeniable proof of trickery, caught in the act.
Undeniable. And when journalists and some of the more skeptical investigators confronted the girls with this evidence and the general suspicion, they admitted it.
They admitted faking.
They admitted faking some of the incidents. Not everything, but some. Janet later tried to explain it or maybe rationalize it. She said they only did it once or twice.
Why? What was her reason?
She talked about being under immense pressure. This constant stream of people, investigators, scientists, reporters, camped out in their small house day after day, week after week, all expecting something amazing to happen.
Like they had to perform.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She said they sometimes did it out of boredom and frustration when the real entity, as she put it, wouldn't perform on cue. She said she felt like she had failed the investigators when the house was quiet.
That admission must have been explosive.
Absolute critical turning point. The media, which had initially painted them as these terrified victims of the supernatural, they just flipped instantly.
Turned on them.
Completely. Suddenly, the narrative was, they were frauds, clever hoaxers who'd fooled everyone. Grosse and Playfair were ridiculed in the press as naive, easily duped old men, credulous fools. The public perception shifted overnight. Enfield was just a big hoax.
And this is the core of it. We can't just stop there, can we? We can't just say, oh, she faked something, so the whole thing was fake.
Precisely. This is where we absolutely have to come back to that 80-20 paradox we talked about. We have to acknowledge the faking, the 20%, but we can't let it erase the other 80% of the evidence. We have to look at the entire data set.
Okay, let's lay it out. The evidence for hoaxing.
All right. Supporting the hoax theory. You've got the video footage of Janet caught bending things. You have her own admission and her sister's that they faked some incidents. You have at least one professional ventriloquist, Ray Allen, who listened to the tapes and suggested the voice could have been a clever trick, maybe using the false chords intentionally.
And the pattern of things stopping under observation.
And that crucial pattern, major phenomena, consistently stopping when the girls are being closely watched. That strongly suggests trickery requiring privacy.
Okay. Now, the evidence supporting genuine phenomena.
It's just as compelling, if not more so in some ways. You start with WPC Heeps' signed legal affidavit. A police officer swearing she saw that chairlift and slide 4 feet with no explanation.
You have over 30 independent witnesses.
Over 30. Not just the family. Neighbors, reporters like Graham Morris who got hit by the Lego, investigators. People who saw objects fly, heard the noises, saw heavy furniture move in ways that seemed impossible.
Oh, there's the voice itself.
The Bill Wilkins voice. The verified physiological difficulty of a child producing that sound for hours using the false vocal cords. That's hard physical evidence from vocal experts.
And the absolute clincher, the content of the voice.
The irrefutable corroboration of Bill Wilkins' death details, those specific private facts about the hemorrhage, the blindness, dying in the chair. Facts. An 11-year-old in 1977 had absolutely no normal way of knowing. How do you explain that?
You can't easily, so it forces your rational mind into this really uncomfortable place.
Deeply uncomfortable. How can the exact same case contain both a copper-bottomed police affidavit about impossible physics and video evidence of fraud? It breaks simple categories. It suggests the truth isn't neat, it isn't just A or B, it might actually be A and B somehow.
The 20% that was faked has to be acknowledged. It happened.
You can't ignore it. But logically, that fake 20% doesn't automatically negate the other 80%. It doesn't explain away the police officer or the fireplace ripping out or how Janet knew Bill Wilkins' secrets.
In fact, you could argue the faking makes the unexplained parts even weirder.
Exactly. Why go through the immense effort, the physiological strain of the voice, the risk of discovery with the Wilkins story, only to then cheat by bending a spoon with your hand? It doesn't quite make sense if the whole thing was a planned hoax.
Unless the faking wasn't the source, but maybe a reaction?
That's a strong possibility. Maybe the child, under this insane pressure cooker environment, used faking to keep the attention going, to perform, when the genuine phenomena, which might have been completely outside her conscious control, frustratingly stopped. The hoaxing becomes an emotional response, not the origin of the haunting itself.
So the intense period of activity, it didn't last forever.
No. As Janet grew older, moved through puberty into her mid-teens, the phenomena started to taper off.
The knocks, the voice, the objects.
They became less frequent, less intense, and by late 1979, roughly 2 years after it all began, everything just stopped. The house fell silent. The circus moved on.
But the family, the Hodgsons, they couldn't just move on. They were left with the aftermath.
And that aftermath was profound, lifelong trauma. This is the real human cost of the Enfield paradox.
How did it affect them?
Well, The children, especially Janet, faced relentless bullying and ostracization at school. They were labeled ghost girl, freaks, liars. Imagine being a teenager and having the whole country basically debating whether you're possessed or a fraud.
It's horrific. The world essentially put them on a stage, judged the performance, declared it fake, and then just walked away, leaving them to deal with the emotional wreckage.
Absolutely. The psychological damage lasted for decades. Janet admitted years later that the judgment, the disbelief, made her deeply withdrawn. She even said that at one point she contemplated suicide because of how the world saw her.
And her sister Margaret described the memory how?
Margaret said it was just like a death, really. She said it gets a little bit easier as time goes on, but you never fully forget the horror. That feeling of being invaded, scrutinized, and then ultimately disbelieved.
So the question lingers after all this time. Why? Why did any of this happen? What are the main theories that try to make sense of this ambiguity, beyond just calling it a total fraud?
Well, discounting the simple, it was all fake explanation, which doesn't fit all the facts, there are really two main competing theories that experts still discuss.
Okay, theory number one.
Theory one comes from parapsychology itself. It's often used in these kinds of poltergeist cases. It's called recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or RSPK.
Psychokinesis. Mind over matter.
Essentially, yes. But RSPK theory suggests the phenomena aren't caused by a ghost, not by the spirit of Bill Wilkins or anyone else. Instead, the theory posits that the source is the unconscious, chaotic psychic energy being projected outwards by a living person.
And usually that person is?
Almost always an adolescent, often a girl who is under immense emotional turmoil or stress. Think about puberty, hormonal changes, psychological distress.
That fits Janet Hodgson in 1977 perfectly.
It's a textbook fit. Recently gone through a difficult parental divorce, living in relative poverty, navigating adolescence. RSPK theory suggests the haunting was real, the physical effects were real, but the source was Janet's own subconscious mind, uncontrollably externalizing her inner turmoil into the physical environment.
And that would explain why it was so erratic and centered on her.
Exactly. It explains the chaos, the lack of clear purpose, the connection to Janet herself. And crucially, it explains why the phenomena faded and stopped completely as she matured, went through puberty, and presumably her emotional state stabilized somewhat. The energy source dissipated.
Okay, so that's the parapsychological theory. What's theory two?
Theory two is purely psychological. It frames the entire Enfield event, or at least its persistence, as a profound, perhaps unconscious cry for help.
How does that work?
Think about the situation before the phenomena started. A family dealing with divorce, abandonment by the father, financial hardship, a real emotional vacuum. Then suddenly this poltergeist appears.
And what does it bring?
It brings intense, focused, sympathetic attention, specifically from Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair, these two kind, interested, almost fatherly men who basically move in for 18 months, giving the girls, especially Janet, undivided attention.
So in this view, the phenomena became a way to keep that attention.
It becomes a coping mechanism for the underlying trauma. The haunting, or at least the willingness to engage with it, perhaps even embellish it at times, becomes a way to secure and maintain that vital emotional support and focus. It's less about a literal ghost and more about the needs the situation fulfilled for a child in distress.
Keeping the sympathetic adults around.
Precisely. Ensuring she remained the center of concern, the recipient of care. It frames the whole episode as a complex manifestation of deep emotional need rather than external paranormal attack.
Two very different ways of explaining the why.
Both try to account for the strangeness without resorting to a simple hoax explanation. But, ultimately, maybe the most telling perspective comes from Janet herself, years later.
What did she say? Trying to make sense of it all.
Trying to untangle what was real and what wasn't, maybe what was her and what was it, she gave that famous estimate. She said, I'd say about 80% of it was real.
The 80-20 rule again.
Right back to it. So if we take her word for it, if we accept that maybe 20% was fake, the bent spoon she was caught with, maybe hiding the recorder.
We attribute that to a scared, confused kid under intense pressure, maybe trying to keep the show going when the real thing wasn't happening.
Okay, accept the 20%, but then you are still left staring at the 80%. You're left with WPC Heeps watching a chair slide 4 feet. You're left with a cast iron fireplace cemented in the wall being wrenched out. And you're left with the confirmed, specific, secret details of Bill Wilkins' death coming from an 11-year-old girl's mouth.
The faked 20% it utterly fails to explain that remaining 80%.
It doesn't touch it. And that is the enduring paradox. That's what keeps Enfield debated, unsettling, and relevant even today.
So the investigators eventually left. The reporters found new stories. The voice went silent.
But the Hodgson family, they were left behind, trapped in this kind of perpetual limbo, a liminal space, as some have called it.
Because they could never be fully cleared, could they? Never fully vindicated as genuine victims of something inexplicable.
But also never fully condemned as just simple frauds, because too much evidence contradicted that. They were stuck in the middle of the world's ongoing public argument about their own trauma and experiences.
The ambiguity itself became the real haunting.
You could really argue that.
Yeah.
The true horror of Enfield, maybe it wasn't the entity throwing Lego bricks or speaking in that gravelly voice. Maybe the true horror was the result. This permanent state of uncertainty, the damage done by the scrutiny, the disbelief, the endless debate, that ambiguity haunted them for the rest of their lives.
And that leaves us, and you listening, with a final thought. Something really human to consider, thinking about the damage this did to the family.
Yeah. When the world takes your personal trauma, puts it under a microscope for everyone to see, and then ultimately can't even decide if you're telling the truth, if you're a victim or a liar.
How do you ever really recover from that? How do you regain the ability to trust your own memories, your own senses? How do you ever feel truly safe or truly believed, even in your own home, ever again?
And so, another chapter closes. For more journeys into history's forgotten files, please like and subscribe. Your next story awaits.